On Monday, the UK Parliament debated mass deportations after Restore Britain's Rupert Lowe put a petition out to the public and garnered 700,000 signatures. So there's a great deal of interest about this particular topic, and it's because every day people can see fighting-age males crossing the channel in an invasion fleet to impose themselves upon the taxpayer and get free hotels, mobile phone contracts, trips to the seaside and DJ lessons after they've been lured to the country by people smugglers who market Britain as an open-air brothel. They prey on our children, and then they, via taxpayer-funded lawyers and interpreters, plead on mental health and cultural incompatibility grounds that they shouldn't receive lengthy prison sentences for preying on our children. And unfortunately, the debate coincided with a Commons statement on the murder of former MP and Reform spokeswoman Anne Widdecombe, and a parliamentary debate on the second reading of Shabana Mahmood's legislation concerning her immigration and asylum reforms. The second reading isn't the final reading, but it passed the second reading mainly through votes by Labour MPs, 264 to 90. Some Labour MPs voted against, some Reform, Conservative, etc. MPs, but Labour MPs voted for, and they have a sizable majority, so it's going through to the third reading. But there were some interesting things to come out of this debate nevertheless. So there were some interesting statistics that Sarah Pochin, MP of Reform UK's team, prepped her with. She said in her speech that in the last 7 years alone, 500,000 people claimed asylum in the UK. Of those, 200,000 came in on small boats, and most of the others were visa overstayers. And we know from a Home Office advisor in 2019, under Theresa May, that 150,000 people were overstaying their visas every year, and that's when immigration was net 300,000, and largely from Europe. So when we have substituted Europeans out for low-trust third-world cultures and trebled that amount, well, you can anticipate a much higher rate of visa overstays, particularly from countries like India and Pakistan. Since 2019, 300,000 people who illegally entered or remained in the UK have been granted refugee status, and most will be now claiming benefits, and they will be contributing to the £15.3 billion benefits bill claimed by foreign nationals at least every 18 months. There's even more when you factor in second-generation immigrants and naturalised British citizens who are first-generation immigrants. By 2030, Pochin said, that number could be over 400,000, which is a city the size of Coventry. So we have a modest-sized city of people that never needed to be here from disproportionately backward violent countries who commit, again, disproportionate amounts of crime. Afghans and Eritreans commit sex crimes 20 times the rate of that of British nationals, and that's not just ethnically British people, that's just people who have a British passport, so it's even more disproportionate when you're talking about white British males. And they take tax money in benefits, social housing, all sorts of other subsidies, at vastly higher rates than the native population. The government has increased legal aid for appeals for rejected asylum claims by 30% to over £60 million a year. So the human rights lawyer grift engine is getting well over 60 million quid a year in taxpayer subsidies to lobby perpetual appeals on behalf of illegal migrants and fake refugees. And 80,000 appeals are currently underway. So since Keir Starmer has been Prime Minister, there have been more than 72,000, I think it's up to 75,000 now, small boat crossings with no serious attempt to stop the boats or smash the gangs or whichever slogan Andy Burnham decides to generate from his Mancunian focus groups. And that's also, by the way, isolated from all other costs, that 60 million quid, that £8 billion asylum bill, because there are interpreter costs, there are other benefits costs, there's also the cost of expanding the criminal justice system to deal with all of the optional crimes that these people commit. They didn't need to be here, they didn't need to commit a crime, but the police has to do all of the work investigating it, apprehending the perpetrator, put them through the court system, they have to pay lawyers, and then think of all the costs lost to legitimate businesses going under in the aftermath of COVID to be replaced by money laundering fronts, hawaladars, Turkish barbers, vape shops, who are connected to the smuggling trade, who facilitate the passage of these men into Britain. That we know, for example, with the Afghan phone shop in Woolwich that the BBC uncovered a couple of months ago, coordinating with people smugglers to bring in men from Afghanistan. So imagine all of the money lost on not just business rates, because the Laffer curve has been well and truly proven with the amount of taxes going up to record levels and still tax receipts coming in lower than the benefits bill, so it's an unfundable system. Not just that, but just the amount of revenue lost from businesses operating legitimately and businesses being replaced by cartel fronts that don't do legitimate trade and instead inflict all these other costs on us instead. So the system is just hemorrhaging money. It is wreaking untold demographic, cultural, and criminal damage on our country. And there seems to be no real appetite by the present government or the previous Conservative government to stop that. Actually, as Esther McVeigh pointed out in her contribution, the average daily arrivals of illegal migrants are up 94% under the current government. And then you had Rupert Lowe, whose petition sparked this debate, and he got up and just unleashed a torrent of gems.
But legal reform is just the start. That simply sets the scene for the most ambitious set of deportations ever seen. The real question is this: how can we remove all of those with no legal right to be in Britain? No legal employment, no legal tenancy, no access to public services, no banking facilities. That single reform becomes the backbone of our immigration enforcement. Make life so incredibly uncomfortable and unsustainable that many will simply deport themselves. If Uber Eats, Deliveroo, and the rest are found to be employing illegal migrants, they will be fined, prosecuted, and even shut down. The farce of young Sudanese illegal migrant men delivering spring rolls and pepperoni pizzas on mopeds in every British suburb will end.
And unpacked all of the details contained within Harrison Pitt's mass deportations document, which is just a sensible policy proposal that any self-respecting government should be taking up to deal with this problem. But it wasn't all good. Fat ginger beta male Jonathan Brash, who never passes up an opportunity to dive in front of a camera and display his woke credentials, decided to desperately jump up and down and declare Rupert Lowe a racist and accuse him of engaging in dog whistle politics for wanting to send every foreign criminal back where they came from.
But more importantly, the language we use matters. It affects how people view their neighbours. It affects how communities feel, and it affects people's lives. And that brings me to a point that I want to make very clearly today. A constituent of mine, Jasveer Singh, came to see me just a couple of weeks ago after experiencing repeated racial abuse in the community where he has lived and served for almost 30 years. He owns a local business. He has paid his taxes. He has contributed to Hartlepool. He has built a life there. He has done exactly what we say we value. Yet he came to see me because the rhetoric around immigration has made his life harder. Jasveer is not an illegal immigrant. He is not a criminal. He has every right to be here. He is part of our community. Yet a small minority accuse him of being an illegal immigrant, of arriving on a small boat and having no right to be here for one reason alone: the colour of his skin. Because when politicians blur the line between legitimate concerns about illegal immigration and language that encourages suspicion of people because of their background and their skin colour, it is people like Jasveer who pay the price. That is why the rhetoric we use matters. There is a line between wanting to secure borders and stirring up hostility. There is a line between removing those with no right to remain and portraying whole communities as a threat. There is a line between legitimate concern and racist dog whistle politics. And it is my view that that line has been crossed repeatedly by the member for Great Yarmouth. We can have secure borders without losing that most fundamental of British values, common decency. We can have a firm immigration control without attacking decent people based on their skin colour. And we can tell the truth about illegal immigration without turning on our neighbours. We will not import Trumpian politics into our country. That is not the British way.
As did obese race grifter, Clapham and Brixton Hill MP Belle Ribeiro-Addy. She complained that the rhetoric around asylum seekers, migrants and refugees was deterring them from coming here. Yeah, that's kind of the point. We don't want them here at all. But you just don't like white people. And so anything that disadvantages them is fine in your books.
And the language of swarms and invasions are just inflammatory, racist and dehumanising, and they continue to cause problems throughout the discourse and debate. What I want to see is a situation where we talk about asylum seekers with some humanity. What I want to see is a situation where we don't cast off those in our communities that have actually come here and sought support from us. As I said again and again, we have a duty to them under the Refugee Convention. We have a duty to them. We have a moral duty to them.
And then speaking of stupid people, staggering midwit Mike Tapp, who is an immigration minister for the government, had the final word. He accepted a fair amount of interjections during his speech. He also failed the breakfast question, because Kieran Mullen, who's the Conservative MP for Battle and Bexhill, asked a conditional hypothetical about whether or not the Labour government would be prepared to repeal the Human Rights Act and leave the European Convention on Human Rights if they had exhausted every opportunity to deport illegal migrants and found that there was no legal loophole. It was actually just the legislation itself getting in the way. And Mike Tapp said, "But we are trying to deport immigrants, though." Dear God, the guy can't rotate shapes in his mind. He did, however, agree with Brash and Addy. I will move on to the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth, who I know has been a voice behind this petition and on social media. I've never referred to anybody who cares about this topic as the mad fringe or racist. It is about people's own perceptions. It's for them to decide whether they are racist or mad fringe. Having these concerns is absolutely valid, but I very much agree with the Honourable Member for Hartlepool, Brash, that we must mind our rhetoric, because the public do listen to what we say in this place. Yeah, they hear you every time that you're deflecting away from the problem of importing thousands of murderers and paedophiles into the country. They actually do hear you not addressing the concerns. You're right. They do see the murderer of Wayne Broadhurst, Dawood Safi, being eligible to plead for manslaughter despite him stabbing Wayne Broadhurst to death repeatedly on camera, despite lying about his age, saying he was 5 years younger than he actually was, despite saying that his dad was killed by the Taliban and he was persecuted by the Taliban when he wasn't. People see that. They see their justice system treating these foreign perverts and predators and barbarians with undue leniency at their expense, at the expense of their lives and the lives of their loved ones. And so they see this time and time again. And so they see your inaction, and they hate you for it. And they also see the constant tiresome back and forth of, but Labour, but the Tories. Because Tapp said, I have talked about the ECHR already. The Honourable Gentleman Rupert Lowe has produced a large book, Harrison Pitt's Mass Deportations Document. He did say he would not go into detail, but maybe there is some in there. I respect that sort of work going into policy development, but as I say, we have to make sure that we maintain our British values throughout. Again, Mike Tapp just uses the phrase British values as a force field around his particular kind of politics, because he defines multicultural Blairism as British values. Tolerance, the rule of international law, these are apparently British values. Diversity being our strength is a British value. So there's nothing distinct about the British people and their possession of their own country. Instead, it is just subservience to the managerial regime currently depriving us of it. And Rupert Lowe got sick of this and interrupted and said, I think the British public have had enough of Labour blaming the Tories and the Tories blaming Labour. Meanwhile, this national emergency continues to get worse. Does the minister accept the fact that just playing he said, she said is not good enough, we need to change that attitude? And Tapp says, I respect the intervention. I did say that I apologise for having to raise this again, but is it a fact that we inherited a completely broken system? It does take time to fix a broken system. We're working hard to do so. 1, no, you're not. 2, you're not actually fixing anything. And 3, people are sick to death of it. And they see it. And this is why people have nothing but contempt for the political process. This is why the majority of the country disagrees with Tapp and Ribeiro-Addy and Brash. And this has been tabulated in a new study, Britain Under Strain, The Broken Social Contract, Democratic Distrust and the Mainstreaming of Extremism, by RICU darling Dame Sara Khan, she who had the charity Inspire, who produced Michael Gove's definition of extremism, and whose Union Jack hijab image was published on the front page of The Sun in the aftermath of ISIS beheading British aid worker Alan Henning. She is at the centre of the Don't Look Back in Anger department, and her sister was the deputy of it. And her collaborator in this is Dr. Matthew Godwin. No, not Matthew Goodwin of Reform and Chat GPT fame. I had to do a double take of that myself. Godwin is actually an employee of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change's Extremism Policy Unit and a researcher in the House of Lords. And he has a PhD from UCL. So he's one of the regime's court academics. And this was for the UK Extremism and Democratic Resilience Centre. So it's a biased, liberal outfit that employs the employees of the regime, like Dame Sara Khan, as its spokespeople. To say there is no other system but the liberal Leviathan trying to reconcile the competing ethnic, cultural and religious groups imported into our country under the auspices of multiculturalism, trying to prevent them from playing out their existential conflicts in Britain's streets. And it's a futile, ultimately violent and deadly enterprise, but it's the one they insist on anyway. But they're gritting their teeth, because this paper found some alarming attitudes among the public that they really didn't like. In the foreword, Khan warns, "The threat now facing us is more serious, more deeply rooted than when she was the Counter-Extremism Commissioner. This is not a passing dip in confidence, but a structural crisis as a result of a chronic erosion of trust in institutions," I wonder whose fault that is, "now fueling a broken social contract. A majority of the public believe the bond between citizens and the state has broken down, and that belief cuts across income, age and party. Related to this, the cordon sanitaire, the consensus that extremist narratives and conspiracy theories," we'll get onto what she defines as those in a moment, "should not be allowed to pollute the mainstream is also broken. Ideas once confined to the fringe are held by large minorities and in places majorities of the public. Concern that diversity is eroding national identity is now a mainstream view held by a majority of Britons. Beneath that broad anxiety sits a harder minority view. Support for traditional extremist beliefs such as ethno-nationalism and remigration are held by a meaningful share of the public." So she defines identifying the British people as being the English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish who are native to these lands as an extremist position. And of course she would, because she's a Pakistani Muslim woman whose entire presence in public life is contingent on insisting that diversity is our strength and that multiculturalism is possible. And also she defines remigration, the returning of unwanted immigrants to their ancestral lands, as being an extremist position. I actually think that mass migration, multiculturalism, the demographic substitution of the native people is itself the extremist position. So we just don't agree on premises here, and neither does a large share of the public agree. She thinks that having a ethnically, culturally, religiously pluralist country is the moderate position, even though it is a historical anachronism and has resulted in atrocities in our headlines every single day, like just a new migrant murder or rape every single day, every single hour in London. But Khan says if you disagree with this, you're the extremist. And I just think we just don't have to listen to her, because her politics and her involvement in government for over a decade has brought our country to the brink of ruin. Her agenda is anathema to my flourishing, to what is in the interest of my people, my family, my loved ones. So I don't care, actually, if you're worried about people taking a dislike to the agenda that you have inflicted upon them. She says, "What is at stake is not a policy area or department's remit. It is our democracy itself and the kind of country we want to be, or rather, the kind of country Sara Khan wants to force you to live in. Seeing the scale of the problem clearly is not the same as giving up. If anything, it's the precondition for doing something about it." So this is a call to action for the establishment to censor our opinions, because we hold perspectives they cannot sustain. Their regime cannot withstand criticism, and so they want to silence their critics. Remember, everything Sara Khan does, everything that these establishment-aligned outfits do, is running interference, playing containment, on behalf of the state's multicultural managerial ideology. And if you don't adhere to that ideology because you're not an ideologue, instead, you are a empiricist, and you just see the horrific consequences it visits upon us, the danger it puts us and our families in every day, then you are an extremist. But I just don't agree with the parameters by which they set the definition. So there are some statistics on page 8 to 11 from their polling and focus groups. 61% of the country believe that the social contract is broken, only 23% believe it is working. That 23% is suspiciously close to the share of the population that are migrants. I'm not saying all of the survey respondents that said it's working are the migrants, but it is certainly likely to be the beneficiaries of the system. The people that take disability benefits, the people who are invested in the public sector, continuing to grow larger per capita than communist China's, because they're paid by the state. They are the people that are members of trade unions that are also joined at the hip with the Socialist Workers' Party and Stand Up to Racism. These will be the true party apparatchiks, the people that during Chernobyl would have denied there being graphite on the roof. Whereas the majority of the country are thinking, why the hell am I working so hard when my taxes are going up, my area is looking worse? There are people from the Horn of Africa and the Middle East and India wandering about in my high street that weren't here 5 years ago, that didn't even know my little corner of England, my area of paradise, existed when they wanted to come here. And I just know that I'm paying for these people's presence, and it makes my daily life a misery. Why am I doing so much for so little in return? And you wonder why people think the social contract is broken. It is because the contract you have written systemically disadvantages them. On purpose. It treats them as responsible for all of the atrocities throughout history, some of which are invented. And denies that we have a distinct identity and a heritage to be grateful for. This is particularly pronounced among Reform UK voters, who are still topping the polls at this time, 83%. The Greens, though, are just behind at 67%. And this is because the Greens are the insurgent revolutionary force on the left, even though they are still adjacent to regime interests. I mean, they have all the politics of Goldman Sachs and Bill Gates. They just don't like Israel very much. And then Reform, again, they are the protest vote for the dispossessed white working class of Essex, seaside towns like Clacton, formerly Great Yarmouth, areas of the north, who will soon fall out of love with Andy Burnham. And Reform are slowly realising this and are trying to regain lost ground to the likes of Restore Britain and their vocal and online critics, their critical friends, if you were. But regardless of how you feel about these parties, there is discontent with the various flavours of establishment electoral politics, Labour, the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, among both left and right. And this is what they fear. They fear the centrist Blairite consensus being broken apart by the manifest consequences of their ideology that they can't censor fast enough to stop. And they genuinely believe that you talking about the problem is causing the problem. If you just didn't know about the problem, there wouldn't be a problem. 36% say it's because governments don't deliver on their promises. 32% believe capitalism has failed and we need a communist revolution. This will be a large portion of young people who have been ideologically warped by the education system, who have been one-shot by algorithms and leftist manipulation from American-headquartered social media companies on TikTok, Blue Sky, Reddit, etc., who have grown up watching Hassan Piker and other sorts of resentful revolutionaries online that can get away with all sorts of violent rhetoric, while perfectly anodyne opinions on the right have been censored, shadow banned, suppressed, targeted by violent leftists for over a decade. This is the consequence of the demoralization that Yuri Bezmenov warned about in the 80s and 90s. These are the rotten fruits that have sprung from the establishment tree. But the most interesting statistics are about identity. 55% believe national identity is disappearing because of diversity. 45% say it strengthens it. So it's very polarized, but the majority of the country think that it's not just the logistics of immigration. The roads, the social welfare systems, the NHS. It's the unfamiliarity they feel when they board public transport and everyone is speaking in different Star Wars dialects into speakerphone. It is just seeing random people that, on face value, they can tell are from somewhere else all over the place. It's really unpleasant, actually, to not see your fellow countrymen in areas of your country. When you feel like a stranger in your own country. And that is a completely unfair thing to force people to feel. And they have been forced, because we voted against it at every opportunity and received more immigration as a form of punishment anyway. And so the organic opinion is that diversity, which is code for non-native people, or non-white, because this is just a sort of superficial judgment, snap judgment, and the celebration of foreign cultures, the accommodation of foreign religions, this is a net detriment. This is not the country we want to live in, contrary to what Sara Khan says. Because she is part of the 45% who say it strengthens it. So she is saying, we must force the country to accept diversity because that's the country we want to build, not the one that they want to live in. And then 33% support remigration. A full third of the country support remigration. Not just mass deportations for illegals, but the reversal of legal migration. 33%. I will remind you, that is a higher share than any single party is currently polling, and I think, judging by certain polls, a higher share than reform and restore combined. So anyone who has a comprehensive policy and credible personnel willing to carry out mass deportations and remigration can win up to a third of the electorate. And that, under a first-past-the-post system, is an overwhelming parliamentary majority. So it's on the table. It's well within the Overton window. The term does not spook people. In fact, it seems this is actually more palatable than the term like mass deportations, even though people, from their strong sense of Anglo-Saxon justice, want to see punishments given to illegal migrants, particularly foreign criminals. So mass deportations is fitting for them. But a term like remigration, which encompasses the reversal of indefinite leave to remain, the removal of citizenships, the prescription of certain cultural practices we don't like carrying the kirpan or halal slaughter. All of these things enjoy popular support. If you do the hard work of drafting the bill that allows you to do it, as the folks over at the Prosperity Institute have been doing, for example, as other people have been doing, then you can win a majority at the next election, and you can govern effectively and solve these problems. And the fact that the likes of Sara Khan and Tony Blair Institute employees are petrified of this shows you it's the right thing to do. Among those who feel national identity is disappearing, 87% of Reform UK voters say it is. So, Reform, overwhelmingly, their supporters, do not want this British values, anyone can become British, we don't care what your identity is as long as you abide by the law and pay taxes, liberal bollocks. They just don't want it. They don't want more Blairism. It has deprived them of the primary claim to their country, which they feel in their bones that they have, which they would like to pass on to their children and grandchildren. And so, speak to those concerns, it's fair. By ethnicity, 61% of white people say so. Only 23% of non-white people. So, going after minority vote shares that are already the clients of the Uniparty, who promise to import more of their co-ethnics and give them more money, is a fool's errand. Less than 5% of Muslims are going to vote for reform. It's pointless trying to pander to them. Conservatives, interestingly, 64% said national identity is disappearing. That would be because of your party. So you may want to reassess who you're voting for, I'm afraid. Subsidiary questions include 60% of people seeing the Unite the Kingdom march, led by Tommy Robinson, as a nationalist march attended by extremists and racists. That has been successfully demonised by the likes of Keir Starmer and the media. Only 40% see it the opposite, but the fact that that's grown to 40% in the course of a decade has been a pretty significant gain by the, let's say, the nationalist narrative, no matter my misgivings with Tommy Robinson's enthusiasm for more Sikh and Hindu migration. 31% are open to the view that non-white people will never be as English, Scottish, Welsh as white people. Okay, it's not white people, it's English, Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish people, Ulstermen, are English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish by a dint of their heritage, and they happen to be white. Like, a French person cannot become English. An Albanian cannot become Scottish. I can't become Scottish, because I don't think I have any Scottish ancestry. I can't become Scottish any more than I can become Japanese. It's just a category distinction. All sensible people who are not engaged in motivated reasoning or lying for ideological reasons can recognise this. Untwist your knickers, it's fine. 42% disagree that British Muslims can integrate into British society. Yeah, I agree. Because British society is a Christian civilization, and also Christianity is intertwined with our ethnic identity because it shaped our small family structures, our low rates of cousin marriage, our manners, our entrepreneurial culture. Whereas Islam and the clan structures of 7th century Arabia and now present-day Indian subcontinent are highly tribal, highly incestuous, and so Islam reinforces the cousin marriage clan system, and cousin marriage clan system reinforces Islam. It's a circular system. So they're just incompatible. You can't have it, I'm afraid, and I don't care if that offends you. 15% believe that some races are born less intelligent than others. I don't live in a free country, so I'll be careful what I say, but we've all seen the charts. And 41% say that Britain is built on Judeo-Christian values that should be defended. In contrast, 59% feel the UK is a secular country not based on any single faith. That is a result of rising secularism and foreign religions, and a desire to see liberal pluralism proliferate as an all-encompassing ideology that can force incompatible religions to coexist. But that just isn't true. We are a Christian country, no matter how the Church of England behave, and might persuade you otherwise. We always have been, we always should be. And this is why Christianity is resurging among people that are concerned about being dispossessed of their country, not necessarily because they're Christian nationalists or because they have a great affinity for observing holy days of obligation, but because they feel it's theirs, that they possess it. And if they relinquish that possession, well, foreign groups aren't so inclined to be so bashful about their religious and ethnic identity, so why should we give it up while they're chauvinistic about theirs? And I think it's very sensible to take your own side and partake in the traditions that gave your ancestors such conviction to build a country that you have inherited. Don't squander your inheritance, Western man. On those who believe that diversity is destroying national identity, in the conclusion, it says, anxiety about national identity is not a fringe sentiment. A majority of Britons hold it, and while most of this anxiety is cultural rather than racial, a meaningful minority on all sides show openness to explicitly ethno-nationalist or conspiratorial framings. And by conspiratorial, they mean the big swap. I'm going to have to use a euphemism for that theory. I don't know, man. I just read the ONS charts, and they look pretty convincing to me. And also, they define ethno-nationalist as saying being English, Scottish, Welsh, or Irish is a matter of heritage. So, apparently facts are now ethno-nationalist. Also, it's not purely ideological or cultural, because we know from polling conducted by Eric Kaufman in the aftermath of Henry Novak's murder that a high proportion, about 70% of Reform voters, hold their white racial identity to be key to their own sense of self. So, it is important to people. And it turns out that it is increasingly important the more they feel their demographic backs are against the wall, and the more that you celebrate things like black pride or black excellence or a strong sense of racial superiority among non-whites who resent white people for the crime of bringing them civilization, the rule of law, the wheel, and banning widow burnings. Under the section on remigration, they find that support for remigration is at 33%. However, while representing a third of the country, even among those who believe diversity damaged the country, many draw a line at the explicit removal of legal residence. Support is strongest among dissenting disruptors, and these are their profiles for certain types of voters. So people who want to revolt against the Uniparty, 55%, traditional conservatives, 53%, rooted patriots, 46%, and is associated with being white, believing the social contract is broken, and voting reform. Reform voters support remigration, so do Restore voters. So it would just be sensible to use the term, even on electorally expedient grounds. Elon Musk uses the term, Donald Trump uses the term. It's not taboo, it's not going to get you associated with any 20th century bogeymen. It's just the sensible, necessary policy to restore demographic security, cultural continuity, and fiscal restraint to our country. As for what they define to be ethno-nationalist identity, believing that being British is a matter of heritage, Reform UK is the only party split evenly, 50%, on ethno-nationalist identity. Supporters of every other major party express majority opposition to the ethno-nationalist position. 91% of Greens, 84% of Labour voters, 78% of Liberal Democrats, and 66% of Conservatives. So, it is a issue of growing importance and consciousness among the voters and supporters of the most popular party in the polls. And there's a fascinating chart on page 44, which shows who believes this. Among all people, 69% say anyone can be English, Scottish, or Welsh regardless of ethnic background, but that share has probably decreased over the last few years. Progressive activists is 95%, the incrementalist left is 84%, established liberals are 88%, but people who spend a lot of time on social media, 55%, rooted patriots, 57%, traditional conservatives, 54%, and dissenting disruptors, the people they would call the far right, or your average Reform and Restore voter, 50%. So, the issue is growing, and it seems to be a position that people support or are sympathetic to among the 4 core constituencies that Reform and Restore are targeting. So, you can just accept facts. And the price of not accepting facts, by the way, is playing into the cycle of demoralization and ideological subversion that, as Yuri Bezmenov warned, would turn your young people into communist revolutionaries who are utterly rootless, who have no loyalty to their own country, and are either disarmed against or willfully participating in the overthrow of their civilization. The confiscation of your country away from you as they cheer at Glastonbury while Bob Villan gloats, "Heard you want your country back? Nuh-uh, shut the fuck up." And the issue is becoming increasingly unavoidable, as this piece by Charlie Cole in the Pimlico Journal, I know myself and Pimlico have had our words over the years. They said some unkind things about me. I called them bully schoolboys and basically Piggy from Lord of the Flies. It's all water under the bridge, guys. We're doing good work, right? Respect among equals. Anyway, Charlie Cole's produced a fantastic essay here documenting the decline in the white British share of school pupils. And based on some previous modelling that he provided to me in a video I made before, we know that our children, if they're born now, my children included, my daughters, will be a minority in their own generation by 2031. That's less than 5 years. And you can see this in current trends, because now white British pupils make up just 59.8% of state-funded primary school students. Non-whites make up 38.9%. So we are reaching an almost inflection point where our children are minorities in their own classrooms. And if you're noticing a bit of a discrepancy there, it's because some children don't have their ethnicity recorded, and so we can presume they're probably not white British. So 41% of children in schools across the country are not native. And this is the same in secondary schools. Again, 41% of children are not native. 59% are white British. And this is pronounced in specific areas because if you look at places in London, for example, Poplar and Limehouse has only 9%. You've got areas, it was East Ham, where only 2.3% of school pupils are white British. The same in Newham, in Tower Hamlets, Bethnal Green and Stepney, it's 5.2%. Even in some of the outer areas of London, like Bromley and Biggin Hill, it's 54%. Or if you go to Bexley, it's 52%. And the same pattern is repeated in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Luton. It's only areas like Norfolk or Cornwall or Shropshire or certain bits of the north bordering Scotland where British children are still a majority. But schools are also closing down because classroom sizes have begun to shrink because people are having fewer children. And it's because the white British birth rate is substantially lower than replacement, whereas the non-native birth rate in many instances, particularly Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Indians, Nigerians, is much higher. And this is why births have now fallen among white Brits to only 53% of all births every year. Trend has continued in Wales. The share of non-native, non-British students in Welsh schools has trebled from 5 to 15% since 2004. Very similar in Scotland. It's almost doubled between 2003 and 2010. And then it has doubled again between 2011 and 2019 to 20%. And then if you look from 2020, it's gone from 14.6% to 19.9%. Northern Ireland has a lower share overall, but it has increased between 2006 and 2026 from 1.7 to 8%. And in private schools, it doesn't fare much better either. In fact, in private schools, we've got 57% of pupils are white British and 42% are ethnic minority or even immigrant, because there are lots of rich foreigners who send their children over for a first-class education in the UK. That share has dipped slightly, or the trend has slowed somewhat because of a restriction on VAT fees on private schools. They've removed the tax exemption from that, so it's made it more cost-prohibitive for foreigners to send their children, and also just white British people as well. But the trend is persistent across public and private education. Our children, if they enter the school system, will soon be minorities in their own classroom. And I'm sorry, but you can't turn around and tell someone they can't care about demographic issues when it's a lived reality for their children. When their children are going through an education system that treats white people as perennial oppressors, that blames them for all the earth's ills, and that glorifies colonization in reverse, according to certain poems on the prospectus, or the poem Look We Have Coming to Dover about Blairite immigration reforms, where Indians come over and lord their presence over the natives, just like lords ministering the waves in the poem. The entire education system is geared to denigrate whites, to instill in pupils the message that history has been one long unbroken chain of waves of migration and a progressive arc of liberation of oppressed peoples, like chattel slaves and the transatlantic slave trade. Nothing about the Arab slave trade. Nothing, of course, about the Barbary slave trade of whites as sex slaves in Muslim empires, of the Holocaust, of the First and Second World Wars, and then it culminates in the history curriculum learning about the Beatles, the sexual revolution, and civil rights in America, and then complaining about Thatcher's miners' strikes. So that's the education system. It denigrates white people, and that's why they're a majority. What happens when they become a hated, marginalised minority, as if they are South African Boers in Britain? Dread to think. This is an appalling future we're inflicting on our children. And yet, you've got people saying that it's immoral to even talk about this. That there's no problems, that diversity is not just the cornerstone of our identity, not just our strength, but has somehow always been here and built Britain, despite not being able to build its own countries. And their inability to build a civilization is somehow our fault. The cognitive dissonance doesn't need to be reconciled, they just hate white people and want us extinct. As for attitudes towards Islam, 42% disagree that Muslims can integrate into Britain. That's 45% among white Britons. 71% of reform supporters feel British Muslims in Britain, are incapable of integrating into British society. Okay, so Reform's attempt to pander to Muslims over the last 2 years has been an absolutely grave mistake. Its prominent Muslim figures should either, authentically, renounce their Muslim identity, because not really Muslims, are they? Like, sorry, but if you're drinking, you're hardly keeping to the rules of the Hadiths, are you? And then they should shut up forever about winning the moderate Muslim vote or not wanting to alienate Islam. And I think they're starting to realise this was a mistake. But authentically, their own base just don't like Islam, because they can see it is a civilization set apart from us, and actually Western Christendom forged its identity in contrast to Muslim invasions. So it is so deeply ingrained in our national psyche that you're never going to get rid of it. And then, on conspiracy theories and extremist beliefs, 29% believe in the large swap theory, and that's 54% of Reform UK voters. So 54% of Reform UK voters just read the demographic projections released by the Office of National Statistics. They see that Mohammed has been the most popular name for newborns for I think the 3rd or 4th year in a row now. And they just read government data, and apparently this is conspiratorial. But I can't say any more because I'll get taken off YouTube. And this is described, the large swap theory, is described as, by Dame Sara Khan as the false theory that elites are deliberately replacing the native-born population through immigration, otherwise known as the census figures. The hilarious thing, though, is the large swap theory is believed in by 13% of Green voters, which I assume are just the it's happening and it's a good thing cohort. And then if you look at their definitions of the subgroups that they categorise the survey respondents into, progressive activists, incrementalist left, so Fabians, established liberals, people who are system affirming, so people who vote Lib Dem, your average middle-class cyclist, skeptical scrollers, a smaller, younger, online group shaped by financial hardship and anti-establishment grievance where the far-right sympathisers cluster. Hello, my audience. Rooted patriots, who are patriotic and pro-capitalist and hold restrictive views on national identity and who counts as British. Also, hello, my audience, I suppose. Traditional conservatives, who are culturally conservative and patriotic, viewing the UK as built on Judeo-Christian values. It's just Christian, okay? They're separate religions. Doesn't mean we have to be mean to each other, it's just Christianity. Also, hello, my audience, I suppose. And dissenting disruptors, the most alienated and anti-establishment segment, and one of two groups where far-right sympathies cluster, hold the hardest views on identity, migration, and diversity. I suppose hello, my audience, but it's probably the same people that say I took the check and kissed the wall, which I didn't. But if you notice something, if you add all these figures up, 10%, 20%, 8%, 20%, that's 58% of the country. So this report complains that they regard 58% of the country as far-right extremists who hold unpalatable views. So they're petrified that they're losing. They've already lost. This is a 5-alarm fire from the establishment, this report, but it actually should be a source of encouragement for us who want to build a patriotic political movement that takes our side, that acts in our people's interests, that does credible policies, because the majority of the country already agree with it. So you just need to say the right things, have the right policies, hire the right personnel, provide a bit of a reassuring bedside manner, cut through the media bullshit, and then just win an election. I know I sound like Baz, simple as, but it should be encouraging that the majority of the country are receptive to the ideas that this paper finds beyond the pale, because they just so happen to be the same ideas that are necessary to rescue the country from complete existential oblivion. And their pants-wetting fear about being the minority causes them to say in the executive summary section on page 16, Britain's social contract is broken for a majority of citizens. Distrust and disillusionment with our institutions is the norm, and anxiety about national identity and diversity are now mainstream concerns. A collapsed cordon sanitaire, which traditionally kept extremist narratives and conspiracy theories, things that they find inconvenient, confined to the margins, are now held by large minorities, and in some cases, majorities of the population. Ethno-nationalist views, the belief that heritage is the foundation of national identity, are now held by a substantial minority, as is active disengagement from democratic norms altogether. At the same time, contested narratives around identity, fairness and belonging have become increasingly central to public debate. Concerns about national identity are widespread. Persistent anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred and the emergence of digitally driven forms of radicalization demonstrate that extremist attitudes no longer conform neatly to traditional ideological or demographic patterns. In particular, younger and highly online groups show a concerning openness to extremist ideas, even in the absence of clearly defined grievances. Yes, because the consequences of the system that you support are intolerable. People are willing to give anything else a try but what you are offering. And so, shoving it down their throats more just makes them resent you. It just builds the coalition of your enemies. You don't understand this. And actually, them failing to understand it, adapt, to survive, learn any lessons, is to our advantage. Because we can just build a credible alternative to what they insist upon. They say abuse and intimidation directed at elected representatives have intensified, while younger generations are showing weaker connections to civic participation, patriotism, and democratic responsibility than previously seen in the post-war era. Yeah, it's almost like the stabbing of Stephen Timms, the murder of Sir David Amess, and Joe Cox, of course, and Anne Widdecombe, the firebombing of Mike Freer, who was the Golders Green MP's office, the attacks on Richard Tice and Andrew Jenkins and Nigel Farage, the relentless harassment of anyone in public life, including me. You know, I've had now multiple interactions with the police on completely bogus and ideological and ill-motivated grounds. It's almost like you, Sara Khan, and all of your comfortable friends in the establishment, like Michael Gove and all of your co-conspirators in the Uniparty, have built a country that is putting our lives in danger. It's almost like this is the direct consequence of the politics that you inflicted upon us using state power, using the vast resources of the Home Office and every complicit minister in the last 14 years of Conservative government and the last 2 years of Labour. It's almost like this is your fault. And the river of blood that is now flowing is on your hands. And no matter how hard you scrub, Lady Macbeth, it won't wash off. So it would just be better if you retreated from public life entirely and left it to those of us whose hands are not so contaminated by blood to clean up that mess. They won't, of course. They will keep insisting till they're blue in the face that there was a clear affection for multicultural Britain and the country's diversity and the impacts of immigration on British society, even though it was a minority position. Many see the current political climate as failing to value this contribution and threatening. And then they quote Terry, who is a concert promoter and utter cuckold from Uxbridge, who says, "We should embrace them, not marginalise them. It's great. This is why it's great to be British sometimes, because it's so much diversity. The food, everything." He is a literal caricature. He is Piers Morgan. He is the guy that says, "Sorry, a cannibal raped your daughter, but we need him for the football team." And also, if this report believed all this, if they were as secure in Terry, in their delusions, then the report wouldn't be necessary, would it? So the fact that they're worried is a good sign. The final interesting stat worth highlighting is the perception of Britain's enemies, because we don't talk an awful lot about national defence on this channel, but we are defenceless. And also, foreign policy has become a vector for greater liberalised immigration policy. The invade and import strategy that has been the doctrine of previous Conservative and Labour governments, and even the opinion of some people in Reform until their apparent Damascene conversion, which requires greater scrutiny. I think they should be subjecting themselves to much harsher questioning than they currently have to regain their lost credibility. Anyway, as for who do Britain see as their enemies? 61% said Russia, 51% said Iran, but they are the only two countries that the majority of Britain identify as enemies. China is only identified by 28%. The Chinese spy on us all the time. They use honeypot tactics to ensnare our politicians in compromising positions, which means it's probably sensible that we don't allow a bunch of corrupt geriatrics and perverts to be our MPs or congressmen in America, but there you go. 19% say Palestine and 16% say Israel. So both Israel and Palestine are comparably unpopular with the population. Most people either feel positively or indifferent towards them. And it shows that despite the preoccupation with both nations that dominates a lot of our politics, particularly in Westminster, particularly because of the moral narrative of the aftermath of the Second World War and the presence of clannish Muslim colonies in our country, most Brits just don't care. It's far away and it shouldn't concern us. And that was the same with the attitude of the Iran war. Even if you consider Iran to be one of our enemies, there's not much we can do about it. And again, any party which prioritises British interests, makes British identity central to their policy platform and their messaging, and takes a whatever is in our interest we will do foreign policy, to the contrary of what Richard Tice said on Saudi TV, saying we should do whatever the Israelis and the Americans think is best, being led around rather than making our own decisions, taking our own side. Whoever proposes that foreign policy will again sound persuasive to most of the public. And that doesn't mean crashing out about one side or the other of your preferred conflict, be it Ukraine and Russia, be it Israel-Palestine, but it does mean taking a realistic stance on foreign conflicts, and it means that we rearm and repatriate manufacturing and ensure that our energy is cost-effective and plentiful, so that we can make our own decisions again. So that we aren't ensnared in the games of great powers when we used to be one, but our treacherous politicians have diminished us to a bit part player. Party divides on this are interesting. Reform a lot more likely to see Russia, 71%, and Iran, 72% as enemies, and the United States, 71% as an ally. And just as much as the global American empire hasn't always done things in the best interest of Britain, there are plenty of patriots working in the Trump administration trying to do their best to make hay while the sun shines. And I have lots of friends in the United States, and I just want to say that you guys are all patriots. There's solidarity between our respective sides of the Atlantic, and I hope that you regain possession of your country just as we seek to regain possession of ours. And we certainly appreciate all your help from your State Department in doing so. The Green Party, by contrast, are less likely to see Russia and Iran as enemies, 54% and 34%, are more likely to see the United States as an enemy, 26%, are more likely to identify Israel as an enemy, 31%. On page 75, the paper then recommends that Britain adopt the Nordic concept of total defence that recognises that national security depends not only on military capability, but on the resilience of society as a whole. That's, of course, a euphemism for more funding to NGOs and activist charities, civic institutions, bodies like Hope Not Hate, which Sara Khan has previously worked with on an extremism report in 2024, which are defined as sustaining a democracy, because the belief is if we're all blank slates, then there should be a series of ideological institutions that shepherd us towards making predictable choices that are in our presumed best interest, according to our egalitarian anthropology, that push us to make progressive, free, and equal decisions during voting, during our daily lives. And if we do anything to the contrary, then that's proof of the hidden hand of oppression, the injection of artificial division, bigotry, racism by the far right. And what they're saying is patriotic politics should be countersignaled as a matter of national security. So this would be more funding to Special Branch and MI5 and GCHQ to infiltrate and subvert patriotic movements. Something that every person in, let's say, nationalist politics should be very watchful for, because it's doubtless already going on. And they say it on page 129. Democratic resilience is defined as strengthening public trust, safeguarding democratic processes and institutions, protecting critical infrastructure, and ensuring that governments, communities, and citizens are capable of sustaining social cohesion and national unity during periods of crisis or conflict. AKA, we need to keep the don't look back in anger narrative going. And of course Sara Khan is saying that because she was central to RICU for many years. So this is just trying to manufacture consent to further brainwash you. However, they have no answer for dealing with the problems that 58% of the country see as an existential threat, like illegal immigration, or the threat posed by diversity to our national identity, or a demographic substitution, to use an appropriate euphemism for YouTube. They can't deal with the root problems. They can only seek to censor people talking about the problems and gaslight you into thinking there are no problems. In the age of the internet, that dam is cracking, about to burst. And so if all you can do is develop and disseminate compelling alternative narratives and mobilize advocates for democracy where the UK and other democratic nations contest extremist narratives, disseminate new and compelling alternative narratives, and bring to bear the lessons of those who lived under authoritarianism, as they say on page 134, well then all you're trying to do is pacify the population into laying down and taking the costs and crimes of multiculturalism, and I'm sorry, it's just not going to work. Containment has been breached. There are now a series of MPs following Rupert Lowe's lead, talking about these issues and pledging to fix them. And so this is one of the few optimistic videos I'm making, saying that we have momentum. The narrative is on our side, and all we have to do is figure out how to translate that into political action that will rescue our country from utter destruction.